Hello and welcome back to another video. This video is going to be the first in a series about the 50 states of the United States. If you don't know, the United States, rather big country, I think fourth largest overall, is split up into 50 different states. And each state has its own set of laws. So you don't need to show any documents to go from one state to the other, but there are certain laws when it comes to driving. Maybe like in my state, you cannot have a cell phone in your hand. It has to be hands-free. Other states, they do allow for cell phones in your hand. Like you can't even talk on the phone on a cell phone like this up to your ear, or you could possibly get pulled over. Other states, not so much like that. There are different taxes for each state. So you might not know any differences going from state to state if you are traveling here from another country, but there are certain things that makes each state unique, and I'd like to cover them in this series of videos. Now I put it out to people on Hello Talk because often I can get really good feedback there. And I'll be putting up the names of people who gave me a little heart saying, yeah, I'd watch that video. And some people commented, so Liz from Ecuador, thank you so much. You've been very supportive of the channel. Sergo, I hope I'm saying that correctly. There's no I in there, so it's not Sergio. So Sergo from Russia, thank you so much. And Ukraine, kind of a smaller country, but it's always there in the top 10 for viewers of this channel, and thank you so much. Morocco, another small country, yet a lot of views compared to some other countries. So thank you so much. Tatiana, Igor, and Greg from Ukraine all commented on, yeah, I would watch that. So I'm gonna do the first 13 states in this video. I thought about how I should organize it. Should I go largest state to smallest state? Should I start on the East Coast and go over to the West Coast? Kind of more geographically organized. And ultimately, I settled on going from the first state to the last state. So number 1 to number 50. And what you'll see is that it is almost organized by geography. Like if you look at a map, we are going to be starting on the East Coast and work our way towards the West Coast. So basically starting on the New York side of the country, ending up with the California side. And that's pretty much how our country developed. It went from east to west. And if you would like some more details on each state, I spend 10 to 20 minutes on each state on my podcast, and you can find that on all of the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify. Those are the big ones. So if you want to learn a little bit more about each state, I'm up to, I think, Virginia and West Virginia right now. North Carolina and South Carolina will be out soon. I'm also working my way from east to west. And before we get in with the states, I do need to mention this is only the history after Europeans came, specifically the British, the English. So there was a whole history, 10,000 years or possibly more, where non-Europeans were living in this country, and they are, Native Americans are no longer around, at least in the numbers that they once were. So I need to mention that right off the bat, and right off the bat, that's an idiom. I think I've used that one before. I use that like right at the start, right off the bat. And if anybody would like me to do more detailed a sad history on why there are no more Native Americans in this country to speak of. There are some, but the numbers for Native Americans are very small, We can go into that sad history involving a lot of murder. Not fun to talk about, but definitely important to remember. So our very first state, and the reason it is our first state is because that state was the first to sign on to the document which we call the Constitution. The Constitution, big word, but it is all of our most important laws, the big ones, the ones that everybody has to follow, the ones that make our country what it is. And some of the big ones are the freedom of speech. Like, people in this country can say whatever they want, as long as it doesn't hurt others, as long as it's true. So we have the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom for newspaper writers and correspondents on the news to tell the news truthfully and without penalty. So they were the first to adopt the Constitution, but not that many days before like the second and third state. So we have 13 original states, original colonies. And the first one is Delaware. Of course, that they have a nickname, and it's the first state. And they became a state on December 7th, 1778. So that is officially when we began as a country, first state. But I wanted to do more than just have the first state as the first fact for Delaware. So the fact for Delaware is the log cabin, I guess, originated in Finland, but some Finnish immigrants came over, settled in Denmark, and they created or brought the first log cabin to this country. And when people look back on history, the log cabin, that type of building, is very famous for the early part of the United States. We even have like a maple syrup company called Log Cabin Maple Syrup. So it's a pretty famous building, and like Abraham Lincoln, one of our most famous presidents, is said to have grown up in a log cabin. State number 2. And I probably should mention, I didn't mention it in the first one. What I want to do for this video is give you a chance to hear how each state is pronounced, and 1, maybe 2 facts that make that state unique. So number 2 is Pennsylvania. Kind of a tough one there, Pennsylvania. And in Pennsylvania, they have a city called Hershey. And I think their chocolate is kind of famous worldwide. It's definitely famous in this country. It's pretty much the biggest chocolate maker in this country. And of course, in my opinion, it's Cadbury. In England's probably a little better. And there are some Swiss chocolates, of course, that are better. But Hershey is truly American, and they are located, their main store, their main company, their main factory is in Pennsylvania. Next state, number 3, is New Jersey. And I didn't know this until I started researching, but New Jersey actually has a volcano in that state. It is no longer active, but there is a volcano on the east coast of the United States. Pretty rare. West Coast has a few more, but the East Coast, pretty rare. And also New Jersey has the highest density of population of any state, which means people are crammed closer together than any other state. When we get to some of the western states like Montana, people are really spread out. Your closest neighbor might be 10 miles away. Very spread out on the West Coast. East Coast, little closer, and New Jersey is the closest. Got a statistic here for you that I'm going to read. So there are 2,667 people per square kilometer. Per square kilometer. So you can imagine people live in high-rises or skyscrapers. So that's why they're so closely packed. You might have 2,600 people living in 1 square kilometer. So that's the most for this country. But if you look at Singapore, it's like 4 times more. And that's one of the most densely populated places on the planet. 8,226 people per square kilometer. So New Jersey, they're pretty packed in there, but they have nothing on Singapore. Our 4th state is Georgia. And they joined the Confederacy on January 19th, 1861. If you don't know, in the 1860s, the United States was actually divided into 2 countries. The United States of America in the north, but then they had the Confederate States of America in the south. And that is why the Civil War was fought, because there were 2 different countries, one having slavery, one not. If anybody would like, it's a big subject, but if anybody would like some videos on the American Civil War, I would love to do that. I went to school, to college, to university to teach English, but I also went there to teach history, American history. So I know a good bit of American history, and what I don't know, I can research. All right, number 5 and 6, difficult states to pronounce if you are not an English speaker. Number 5, Connecticut. Number 5 is Connecticut. And Connecticut is one of only 2 states never to adopt the 18th Amendment. So we have our Constitution. That's the big laws of the country. It started with 10, which we call the Bill of Rights. But when something major has to happen, a new big law that everybody has to follow, there is an amendment to the Constitution. So there are new laws added. The 18th Amendment, it's a big law, but we call it the 18th Amendment, said that you can no longer drink alcohol in this country. That happened in about the 1930s. So the 18th Amendment, no alcohol. In the whole country, you could not drink alcohol. And Connecticut said, we're actually not going to do that. We're actually still going to drink our alcohol. So they never adopted the 18th Amendment. So of course, in the United States today, you can drink alcohol. A few years after that, people realized, this isn't working. Crime went up. So there was the 21st Amendment, which said, 18th Amendment, just kidding, you can drink again. So, short time in our history where alcohol was illegal. Another interesting fact about Connecticut, the first hamburger was supposedly made in Connecticut at a place called Lewis's Lunch. And apparently, you can still visit Lewis's Lunch today. But in 1900, apparently, supposedly, a lot of native English speakers say supposedly. It's supposedly, 1900, first hamburger in Connecticut. Number 6 is a state that borders my own state, Maine, which we will cover later on. Maine came in as a free state, while Missouri came in as a slave state in 1820. So we'll get there in a couple videos. But for number 6, Massachusetts can be a pretty difficult one. Massachusetts. Massachusetts is where Boston is located, and Boston is the first city in the United States to have a subway. Or if you speak British English, which you should not, right? American English only on this channel. You might call it the tube or the underground, but in the United States, we call it the subway. And Boston was the first to have a subway, and that was in 1897. Hey, what's going on? I gotta wait all day for my daughter to do something, so I thought, why not just record the rest of the video in the car? I'll be able to get it out a little earlier. So, hope you don't mind. It's not like my room at home is this nice fancy studio. This dirty car is probably just as nice. Besides, you're not here to see me. You're here to hear me. And surprisingly, the car has pretty good audio. It's the best I can get, at least, before I buy a fancy microphone or something. But that probably won't happen for a little while. But thanks for tuning in. Well, let's get right to the next state. All right, the next state is Maryland. Maryland, as somebody walks by. Maryland. And you might look at that and try to pronounce it Maryland, but the way we pronounce it is Maryland. Maryland. And one interesting fact, there are many about these states, but one interesting fact about Maryland is that the Star-Spangled Banner was written by Francis Scott Key during the War of 1812. And I can do a video on the War of 1812 if you would like, but it's a war that the United States fought in the year 1812, and the Star-Spangled Banner is our national anthem. All right, we're on number 8, and that is South Carolina. South Carolina, probably not too bad to pronounce. But one interesting thing about South Carolina is that the first battle of the Civil War took place in South Carolina. Again, if you would like a video or 2 or 3 on the Civil War, I can do that. Just leave a comment. I'll get to it. All right, rolling on through with the next state. Number 9 is New Hampshire. New Hampshire. And the first alarm clock was invented in New Hampshire. 1787. First alarm clock. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I haven't used an alarm clock in quite a while. I use my iPhone. I wake up to that every morning. So I bet not many people wake up to alarm clocks anymore. But if you do, the first one was invented in New Hampshire in 1787. Number 10 is Virginia. And Virginia was named after Queen Elizabeth I. And you may think, Virginia, Elizabeth, doesn't even sound the same. Well, apparently, because Queen Elizabeth I, and we're talking like the 1600s in England, was known as the Virgin Queen, Virginia was named after her for being the Virgin Queen. And she never got married, if you're not familiar. Created a little bit of controversy, but James I from Scotland took over after her. And why am I talking about British history? This is an American channel. No more British history. Sorry, forget I said that. And one other interesting fact about Virginia is that 8 U.S. presidents have come from Virginia. If you would like me to do a podcast on the U.S. presidents, or if you'd like me to do a YouTube channel or video, let me know. Comment section. I might do the presidents anyway. I kind of like that topic, so I might do that. Maybe nobody will watch, but at least I'll have fun doing it. That's Virginia. All right, our 11th state, one of the most famous states of all, I believe, is New York. And I did a podcast just on the state of New York. I didn't even mention really New York City. Just the state has so much history. So it was tough to come up with just one fact about New York, but I think I will sum it up like this. The first ever capital of the United States was actually New York City. George Washington, our first president, never actually slept in the White House. He spent all of his time in New York City when it was the first capital. Number 12 is North Carolina. We had South Carolina not too long ago. There is a North and a South Carolina. And the interesting fact about North Carolina is that the first ever airplane took off a place called Kitty Hawk in North Carolina.
and there were two brothers that get credit for creating that first liftoff of an airplane, and they are called the Wright brothers. We'll talk about the Wright brothers again in another episode when we get to Ohio. And we've made it to the final state of the original 13 colonies, and that is our smallest state, Rhode Island. And if you remember when I talked about Connecticut never adopting the 18th Amendment, which said you could no longer drink in this country, drink alcohol, Rhode Island also said, no, we're still going to drink. So that about does it for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, hit that thumbs up button, leave me a comment if you'd like, tell your friends, share this video if you think it could help them learn English and learn a little bit about the United States history. Thank you again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.